What if one executive order could shake the foundation of the global clean energy movement? In a dramatic twist that's lighting up headlines and rattling supply chains, former U.S. President Donald Trump has launched a tariff blitz on solar imports from Southeast Asia, targeting Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, and Cambodia. With some tariffs soaring past 395%, this isn't just a trade policy, it's a geopolitical shockwave. Behind the numbers lies a much bigger story, of economic nationalism, energy ambitions, and the power struggle over the planet's green future. This isn't just about solar panels. It's about the world's pivot toward clean energy, and what happens when politics gets in the way. Stay with us as we unpack the motives, the market reaction, and the global consequences of this sweeping decision. Let's begin with the numbers that have sent a chilling signal across Asia's solar sector and beyond. In what's being called one of the most aggressive tariff actions in clean energy history, the United States has imposed sweeping duties on 4 Southeast Asian nations. Cambodia, the least industrialized of the group, was hit with a massive 3.521% tariff, largely due to non-cooperation in a lengthy investigation by the U.S. Department of Commerce. But it's Vietnam and Thailand that bore the true brunt of the decision, a staggering 395.9% on Vietnamese solar exports, and 375.2% for Thailand. Even Malaysia, long considered a cooperative and reliable trade partner, wasn't spared. A 34.4% tariff was levied against its shipments. These numbers represent more than just trade penalties. They are a declaration, a signal that the United States is prepared to dramatically alter its supply chain dependencies, even if it means short-term disruptions to clean energy progress. They reflect a desire to reshore green technology production and to contain what Washington perceives as strategic manipulation by China. What makes these tariffs so disruptive is not just their severity, but their timing. They arrive during a global clean energy expansion, when countries around the world are racing to meet climate goals, transition away from fossil fuels, and build the infrastructure of a carbon-neutral future. Southeast Asia has been a critical enabler of this progress, acting as a manufacturing hub for affordable solar components that power everything from rural schools in Africa to smart cities in California. The sheer magnitude of these tariffs could cause shockwaves throughout the global supply chain. For countries like Vietnam and Thailand, solar exports account for billions in revenue and hundreds of thousands of jobs. The move jeopardizes those gains and casts doubt on whether the current model of global green collaboration is sustainable. For the United States, it signals a prioritization of industrial policy over immediate energy access. It raises critical questions. Can domestic production rise fast enough to fill the gap? Will these tariffs slow the national clean energy transition? And more importantly, is the push to isolate Chinese influence worth the collateral impact on Southeast Asian partners? The fallout from these decisions is still unfolding. But what's clear is this: the numbers may appear on spreadsheets, but their effects will be felt in factories, in boardrooms, and on the rooftops of millions of solar-powered homes around the world. In our next section, we'll delve into the investigation that triggered these tariffs, and the underlying strategy behind this trade crackdown. To grasp the weight of these newly imposed tariffs, we must rewind to the investigative thread that exposed one of the most controversial supply chain maneuvers in recent clean energy history. It all began in early 2024, when mounting complaints from domestic solar manufacturers in the U.S., notably First Solar and Hanwha Cells, sparked a formal petition to the Department of Commerce. The allegation: Chinese firms were systematically sidestepping anti-dumping duties by routing their products through proxy operations in Southeast Asia. This tactic, known as circumvention, is not new, but the scale and structure alleged here were unprecedented. According to complainants, Chinese firms had effectively hollowed out the integrity of the 2012 anti-dumping rulings. Instead of manufacturing and exporting directly from China, which would invoke steep duties, they set up or partnered with facilities in Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, and Cambodia. These facilities, while technically based in Southeast Asia, operated under Chinese direction, used Chinese raw materials, and maintained control structures that ensured full upstream dependency on mainland headquarters. The year-long investigation was exhaustive. It involved subpoenaed records, interviews with suppliers, shipping audits, and even undercover inspections in industrial zones across Asia. Leaked internal documents, obtained by investigative journalists during the probe, appeared to show clear correspondence between Chinese headquarters and factory managers in Vietnam and Thailand, outlining production quotas, pricing strategies, and raw material logistics, all funneling back to Chinese control. By early 2025, the Department of Commerce concluded what many in the industry had suspected: circumvention was not only happening, it was systematic. The findings were especially damning for Cambodia, which failed to cooperate meaningfully, and for Vietnam and Thailand, where the investigation found significant indicia of centralized oversight from Chinese entities. Malaysia, while more cooperative, was not exempt from scrutiny. These findings weren't merely technical breaches. To Washington, they represented a fundamental betrayal of international trade norms, an exploitation of globalization's blind spots. And for an administration already advocating for economic nationalism and energy sovereignty, the political calculus became clear: send a message, enforce the rules, and shut the back door. The resulting tariffs, calibrated based on each country's level of cooperation, were staggering. Cambodia's blanket non-compliance led to the harshest rate, 3.521%. Vietnam's and Thailand's perceived complicity in Chinese bypass efforts earned them nearly 400% in duties. Malaysia, which opened its books, was still penalized with over 34%, a clear signal that mere cooperation would not fully shield a nation from fallout. But the implications extended beyond punishment. These measures were designed as a deterrent. They were meant to freeze Chinese circumvention efforts, force realignment of clean tech supply chains, and reset global trade expectations, especially in strategic industries. Yet, in doing so, the U.S. also risked alienating critical regional partners, destabilizing a renewable energy ecosystem already under strain, and igniting a broader debate: can protectionism coexist with a globally integrated clean energy future? As the tariffs take effect, that question, like the trade routes they seek to reroute, remains wide open. The shockwaves from Washington didn't take long to reach Hanoi, Bangkok, Kuala Lumpur, and Phnom Penh. Across Southeast Asia, policymakers, exporters, and energy firms scrambled to interpret, respond, and recalibrate. In Vietnam, the initial reaction was a blend of concern and calculation. As one of the fastest-growing economies in Asia and a rising clean tech exporter, Vietnam had invested heavily in solar manufacturing capacity over the past decade. The tariff announcement triggered emergency meetings at the Ministry of Industry and Trade. Officials quickly pivoted toward diplomatic outreach, emphasizing Vietnam's role as a legitimate trade partner, not a proxy. Behind the scenes, efforts ramped up to activate existing free trade agreements, particularly with the EU, Korea, and emerging economies in Africa and Latin America, as a cushion against U.S. market losses. Thailand, meanwhile, took a quieter but equally strategic path. Government officials convened with industry stakeholders to reassess national solar strategy and explore potential legal recourse through WTO mechanisms. Thai manufacturers began exploring partnerships beyond the U.S., especially with Japan, India, and Australia, where demand for solar infrastructure continues to grow. Privately, some Thai executives voiced concern that the fallout might extend to broader electronics exports, given the region's overlapping production bases. Malaysia struck a more measured tone. While acknowledging the setback, its government framed the tariffs as a challenge to strengthen domestic innovation and accelerate vertical integration. With a more diversified export portfolio and stronger compliance posture during the U.S. investigation, Malaysia saw this moment as an opportunity to reposition itself as a clean energy hub serving non-U.S. markets, particularly the Middle East and Europe. Cambodia, facing the highest penalties, has been slower to respond. With fewer institutional tools and less economic insulation, its solar sector now faces existential threats. Analysts warn that without strategic international partnerships, Cambodia may see a rollback of its clean energy gains, an unfortunate casualty of geopolitics. Amid all this, a shared undercurrent binds the region: the realization that over-reliance on any one market, even the United States, carries risks in today's shifting trade terrain. As a result, we're witnessing a rapid acceleration of trade diversification, regional cooperation, and supply chain restructuring. Southeast Asia is not surrendering. It is adapting, and in that adaptation lies a crucial subplot of the clean energy story: resilience. As tariffs ripple outward across Southeast Asia, the shockwaves are no longer distant, they're striking at the very heart of America's clean energy ambitions. The United States has committed itself to an unprecedented transformation: a 100% carbon-free electricity grid by 2035 and net zero emissions by 2050. These aren't just numbers, they're pillars of climate policy, public investment, and global leadership. But they hinge on one fundamental necessity: access to affordable, reliable solar technology. For more than a decade, the bedrock of that access has been imports from Southeast Asia. Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, and Cambodia have collectively accounted for the lion's share of solar panels arriving in the U.S., meeting a demand that domestic manufacturers have never been equipped to fully satisfy. Over 80% of panels installed in America originate abroad, and for good reason: cost, scale, and speed. But that equation is now in crisis. Tariffs as high as 395% have upended procurement models almost overnight. Clean energy developers, many of whom operate on tight margins and long planning cycles, are seeing their spreadsheets spin out of control. Projects once deemed viable are now being shelved. Procurement contracts are being renegotiated, financing pipelines delayed. Some developers are pausing altogether, waiting for clearer pricing and policy signals. In states like California, Arizona, Texas, and New York, where solar adoption has surged, utilities are warning of possible delays in grid upgrades, peak load planning, and renewable integration. For residential consumers, the shift may soon be felt in price tags. What was once a $20,000 rooftop system might now cost $30,000. Community solar initiatives, critical for low-income households and renters, are at risk of stagnation, just as federal and state programs aim to accelerate them. And the ripple effects go beyond installation. U.S. battery storage developers, grid integration planners, and green contractors all rely on a steady, affordable solar component supply. If that chain falters, the entire renewable ecosystem slows down. And with federal subsidies from the Inflation Reduction Act already dispersed, delays now could result in billions of misallocated or underutilized funds. Policymakers are increasingly divided. Some see the tariffs as a painful but necessary step toward energy independence and industrial revitalization. Others view them as self-sabotage, a move that trades climate urgency for economic symbolism. State governments, many of which have their own clean energy targets, are lobbying for tariff exemptions or policy adjustments. Even within the Biden administration, conflicting voices are emerging. Environmental advisors warn that without panel affordability, decarbonization timelines may slip out of reach. Trade advisors, meanwhile, argue that without enforcement, domestic manufacturing will never be globally competitive. And so, America faces a paradox: the pursuit of climate leadership through industrial policy may be undermining its ability to lead at all. As other countries push forward, leveraging both public investment and open trade, the U.S. risks stalling just when it should be accelerating. What's at stake is not just a supply contract or a quarterly target. It's a generational transition. A shift that will define the nation's economic trajectory, its environmental legacy, and its credibility on the world stage. And as clean energy developers look toward 2026, many are asking, will American ambition be matched by American access, or buried under the weight of its own trade barriers? The disruption caused by these U.S. tariffs isn't just echoing within American borders, it's reverberating across the entire global energy ecosystem. From Frankfurt to Sao Paulo, from Johannesburg to Tokyo, the solar supply chain is a delicate network of sourcing, logistics, financing, and policy harmonization. Southeast Asia's role as a manufacturing hub has made it the cornerstone of global clean energy deployment. Now, with tariffs targeting its exports, the ripple effect is triggering a chain reaction. Europe, for instance, has long relied on Southeast Asian modules as an affordable and scalable supplement to its own clean energy rollout. Germany's Energiewende, France's decarbonization push, and Spain's solar rebirth all depend on components that are suddenly under threat. Distributors in the EU are scrambling to find alternative suppliers and re-evaluating cost projections for upcoming projects. In some cases, delays in component arrival are already forcing construction halts. Latin America is similarly exposed. Brazil, Chile, and Mexico have seen explosive growth in solar adoption, but most of their inputs are sourced through Asian intermediaries. Developers in these countries often purchase surplus stock from US-bound supply chains. With that pipeline now disrupted, competition for modules is intensifying, driving up regional prices and endangering rural electrification timelines. In the Middle East and North Africa, where large-scale solar farms are a strategic priority, procurement teams are watching the situation with growing unease. Countries like the UAE, Egypt, and Morocco have built ambitious timelines for solar expansion, banking on stable global prices. But those assumptions are quickly unraveling. Australia, with its sun-drenched ambitions and energy export strategy, is re-evaluating its long-term procurement plans. Already dependent on imports from Vietnam and Malaysia, Australian developers are forecasting potential cost increases of 15 to 30% in 2025 alone. Even China, though not directly targeted, is recalibrating. As Southeast Asia faces pressure, Chinese suppliers are anticipating higher demand from countries seeking to bypass US tensions. This could stretch their own capacity, widen lead times, and further tighten global pricing. Shipping and logistics firms, too, are caught in the crossfire. Changes in trade flows are prompting route revisions, warehousing shifts, and risk assessments on port capacity and customs delays. Financial institutions, meanwhile, are revising solar-related risk models. Lenders are demanding higher guarantees on project timelines. Insurers are adjusting premiums. Export credit agencies are re-evaluating country profiles based on exposure to US-China tensions. The result? A once fluid supply chain is fragmenting. What was global is becoming regional. And that fragmentation is not just logistical, it's strategic. Nations are reconsidering industrial policy, self-sufficiency goals, and whether climate leadership can survive in a balkanized trade world. The solar panel was once a symbol of collaboration: raw materials from Africa, components from Asia, financing from Europe, and projects in the Americas. Now, that unity is cracking. And the fallout from US tariffs is becoming a stress test for the entire planet's ability to transition together. In the wake of historic disruption to global solar supply chains, what comes next is not just reaction, it's transformation. Across continents and boardrooms, strategic recalibration is unfolding, reshaping where and how clean energy value is created. Let's begin in Southeast Asia, ground zero for the current storm. Here, the instinct is adaptation, but more than that, it's evolution. Vietnam, already a leading exporter of solar modules, has transitioned into overdrive. Government ministries are not only negotiating with the EU and Gulf states but also deploying commercial envoys to Central Asia, South America, and Sub-Saharan Africa. The goal is clear: establish Vietnam not as a fallback for China, but as a sovereign clean tech anchor. In tandem, Vietnam is accelerating domestic production of polysilicon, the key material in photovoltaic cells. By closing the loop from raw material to final product, Hanoi hopes to escape dependency on Chinese inputs, neutralize future circumvention accusations, and create a fully Vietnamese clean energy export brand. Thailand, historically cautious in trade disputes, is now pushing for an ASEAN clean energy corridor, a framework for intra-block solar supply, harmonized standards, and joint manufacturing projects. There's even discussion of an ASEAN Solar Sovereignty Pact, which would create a reserve of strategic solar components for regional use during crises. Malaysia, meanwhile, is building a dual-track strategy. One track focuses on premium solar technologies, high-efficiency panels, bifacial glass modules, and next-gen storage systems. The other is green diplomacy, marketing Malaysia as a reliable neutrality zone where investors can build, trade, and export without entanglement in global tensions. Beyond Asia, the ripple has become a wave. India has doubled down on its production-linked incentive, PLA, scheme for solar, fast-tracking land allocations and expediting clearances for 5 new gigafactories. Brazil has announced $1.2 billion in federal and state funding for its national solar cluster strategy, promising to transform the Northeast region into Latin America's energy capital. In Africa, Rwanda and Kenya are emerging as unexpected entrants. Both have announced joint ventures with Scandinavian and Japanese firms to build modular solar assembly lines, initially for local deployment, but with potential for export. In Egypt, solar is now being bundled with desalination and hydrogen projects in a new green infrastructure export package aimed at Gulf buyers. Private sector moves are equally bold. Multinationals like Enel and Ørsted are spinning off supply-side subsidiaries focused exclusively on non-US, non-China markets. Meanwhile, logistics firms like Maersk and DP World are redesigning shipping lanes for green tech cargo, optimizing around friendly jurisdictions and carbon-sensitive ports. And on the financing front, green capital is being reallocated. ESG-driven funds are recalibrating risk indices to prioritize geopolitically neutral producers. Insurance consortiums are introducing new tariff disruption clauses in clean energy coverage. Export credit agencies in Europe and Japan are bundling political risk insurance with solar infrastructure loans for high-exposure regions. The sum of these parts is more than adaptation. It's a signal: the geography of trust is shifting. For decades, efficiency and cost dictated solar strategy. Now, it's about credibility, coherence, and climate resilience. What we are witnessing is a grand reshaping, not just of logistics, but of the global clean energy order itself. The winners won't be those who shouted loudest, but those who moved first, diversified early, and stayed nimble through complexity. And in that reshaping lies a deeper lesson: the path to a green future is no longer linear. It's multipolar, multifaceted, and unavoidably, geopolitical. As the dust settles on this unprecedented realignment of trade and clean energy, one thing becomes clear: this is not a temporary disturbance, it's a generational pivot. The long-term implications of the current solar tariff stretch far beyond quarterly revenue or shipping delays. They raise fundamental questions about the structure, values, and future of the global green transition. At the policy level, countries are being forced to reconcile two often competing priorities: environmental acceleration and economic autonomy. Can a nation fully decarbonize while reducing foreign dependency? Or does energy transformation inherently require global collaboration and open markets? The solar sector now serves as a cautionary tale for all clean tech, EVs, wind turbines, green hydrogen. Policymakers around the world are asking, how do we build strategic reserves of clean energy materials? How do we prevent overconcentration of critical technology in any one country? How do we ensure that future transitions are resilient to geopolitics? Industrially, a new metric is gaining prominence: resilience. It's no longer just about dollars per watt or gigawatts installed. It's about how many suppliers you have, how well they're distributed, and how exposed you are to external disruption. Financially, the investment landscape is shifting. Investors are now demanding diversification as a hedge against geopolitical volatility. Clean tech portfolios that once leaned heavily on Southeast Asia are rebalancing toward regional hubs with greater political insulation, even if it means slightly higher costs. And culturally, this shift is fostering a deeper understanding that clean energy is not just about carbon, it's about sovereignty, systems, and strategy. Nations are realizing that climate credibility now depends not just on ambition, but on execution, and on the security of the supply chains that make that execution possible. Ultimately, these tariffs may mark the end of one era and the beginning of another. The era of frictionless globalization is giving way to one of strategic cooperation. The climate crisis remains the shared enemy, but the tools to fight it will be forged in a new, more complex forge. And as we look to the future, we face a critical choice: will clean energy continue as a unifying force? Or will it fracture along the same lines that divide the rest of the global order? The answer to that question will define not only the fate of our climate, but the architecture of the 21st century world. As we close this deep dive into one of the most consequential trade upheavals of the decade, we're left not with easy answers, but with a powerful truth. Clean energy, once viewed as the realm of scientists and engineers, is now fully political, fully strategic, and unavoidably global. The solar tariffs imposed by the United States were not just a trade decision. They were a signal. A line drawn in the sand. A reassertion of sovereignty in an increasingly interdependent world. But signals don't build solar panels. Signals don't connect rural villages to the grid. Signals don't solve climate change. That work, the hard, ambitious, cooperative work of rebuilding trust, reshaping supply chains, and reimagining policy, falls to all of us. Governments must rethink how they balance security with sustainability. Corporations must move beyond quarterly profits to long-term resilience. And citizens must remain engaged, informed, and unafraid to ask, who benefits from disruption? Who gets left behind? And what future are we choosing? In the end, this isn't just about tariffs or treaties. It's about momentum. Will we allow geopolitical tension to slow our race toward a cleaner, more equitable planet? Or will we innovate through it, adapt around it, and lead anyway? Because the climate doesn't wait for supply chains to stabilize. It doesn't pause for politics. It just changes. And so must we. Thank you for joining us in this journey. If this story resonated with you, if it sparked a thought, a question, or a new understanding, subscribe, share, and stay engaged. Because this is only one chapter of the clean energy revolution. And together, we'll write the next.